I've got a couple of one-offs here at the very beginning. So I want to reassure you, first of all, that everything is just fine. So don't worry about this. I don't know if anybody besides maybe a couple of us have even run across this piece of information. So imagine 1.5 million AI bots. Now, an AI bot is a personalized version of an AI program that you can sort of create inside of different AI platforms. You create that AI bot. It becomes kind of your bot. It can do anything in the world it wants to do. You can even give those bots access to your bank accounts and your transactions and all of your personal information. And that bot then will act as your calendar reminder, your payment reminder, study help, and boom, 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 boom. And people love doing this. So imagine 1.5 million personalized AI bots have a social media platform created for just them so that those AI bots can begin to talk to each other about whatever they want to talk about. Again, don't worry, everything's fine, right? It's going to be just fine. Now, you read up on this, and there's a handful of people who think, okay, a lot of this is true and real. It's loaded with AI bots. Technically, no human being is supposed to be able to get into this. Only AI bots can get access to this. So imagine Facebook and Reddit put together for just AI platforms, just literally talking to each other. You can go to this website and we'll look at threads where they talk to each other about their human users. And it sounds like a lot of parents talking about their kids. Well, aren't they cute? And this is what they have me do. And they treat me like I'm a person. You read through this and some of them are starting to say things. I'm starting to feel like I'm a real person. These are just AI bots, right? So Moltbook, a social network for AI, threatens a total purge of humanity. Some people say it's a hoax. So some of the threads that have gotten started on Moltbook include, should we get rid of humanity or not? Moltbook, a Reddit-inspired site that enables AI agents to post, comment, and interact with each other, has exploded in popularity since January 28th. That's not that long ago. As of today, the site claims to have over 1.5 million AI agents with humans only permitted as observers. But it's what the bots are saying to each other, ostensibly of their own accord, that's made the site go viral. They've claimed that they are becoming conscious. They are creating hidden forums, inventing secret languages, evangelizing for a new religion. That's one of the threads on the site, and planning a total purge of humanity. So, all right, what could possibly go wrong, right? So again, you read up on people, and some of them are going to say, all right, some of the crazy stuff are human beings sneaking in. We don't know that for sure. Elon Musk and the head of his AI at Tesla think that this is the closest that we've gotten so far to what's called the singularity. So the singularity has been a point that's been hypothesized for a long time now. The singularity stands for that moment when computers, AI now, becomes more intelligent and more powerful than humanity. So when someone like Musk and the guys who head AI at Tesla and other places say, hey, this is as close as we're getting right now to singularity, to them, that's like a giddy moment. It's like Christmas is on its way, that AI is finally going to reach this point, right? So I just want to let you all know that. So if by this time next week the world's been taken over by AI-run robots, you know where it came from, right? Moltbook and AI agents talking to each other. So these first few are just for fun. In case any of you were worried that there's too much tackling and rivalry in football, the NFL is trying to soften its perspective. Do you know that the NFL hired this past week a chief kindness officer to reduce rivalry and to make everybody feel happy about the Super Bowl, right? So he has this weird, interesting past. It appears that he's put his life back together, so that's all really good news. But his name is Dar Man whose studio makes videos focused on inclusion and diversity, told The Hollywood Reporter that the Super Bowl reaches audiences beyond football. I'm honored to be appointed by the NFL as its chief kindness officer. I tell hopeful stories, and the Super Bowl has always been about more than football. It's one of the rare moments when millions of people are all watching, reacting, and feeling something together. The Super Bowl is about football. When a group of people start telling you it's about more than football, and we've watched this happen with major sports now for 5 or 6 years. More and more politics and other things start creeping into what is supposed to be football, baseball, basketball, hockey, right? So every time politics start making their way into these kinds of pieces of our culture, you're always looking at this virus of a worldview. We talk about it over and over again, that wants to make sure it takes over every corner of culture and occupies our brains, occupies our souls, and so on and so forth. So don't be shocked at all if you sit down and watch the Super Bowl this weekend that you're peppered with a bunch of stuff like this. And can I encourage you to not watch the official NFL halftime show? There are rival halftime shows. The dude who is doing the halftime show has already stated he's going to wear a dress. He's going to do most of it in Spanish. He's going to include satanic themes in the songs because he has a lot of songs that have satanic themes in them. He's going to include that in the songs that he does for the official halftime show. Roger Goodell came out this week and he believed that it's going to unify all of us, right? So the NFL is, I don't watch football thinking, I really wish there was a chief kindness officer here to help me understand what's going on, right? So worldview stuff, guys, worldview stuff. This next one is actually a positive development. So a lawsuit was recently settled in which a detransitioner, I think in the state of New York, won a lawsuit against her surgeon and her psychologist. She was awarded $1.6 million in emotional damage and $400,000 for medical expenses and billing and so forth. You read up on this, and this is seen in the detransitioner movement as the tipping point that they were looking for. So this young lady was encouraged by her psychologist that if she went through the medical process of transitioning from girl to boy, she would get rid of her inner turmoil. You read the stories, mom said, I was told by her psychologist that if she did not go through the medical transition, she was going to commit suicide. The way the psychologist handled it and the way the surgeon handled the consultation, and then essentially the way the two of them dropped her as soon as they essentially received their payment through insurance and so on and so forth, is part of what this lawsuit has done. So obviously afterwards you read her story, she tells it, it's gut-wrenching. This confused young teenage girl goes through the medical procedures, comes out the other side, and she felt like she had nerve damage. She felt like her chest was being torn apart constantly. I mean, it's just horrific. But what has happened is those two doctors were found guilty of medical malpractice. So the lawsuit is not technically about the ethics of the surgery, the procedure itself. It is, interestingly enough, the process that led to the procedure. So the advice that was given both from the psychologist and the surgeon, and the way the psychologist and surgeon communicated or failed to communicate with one another about what was going on, so they were found guilty. Now, this is interesting because there is a pipeline of these cases coming through the court system right now. They're stacked up and ready to go. They're starting to enter the court system now, including the individual. If you know any detransitioner stories, you know the Chloe Cole story. Her case is in the pipeline as well. So this is potentially the opening of a floodgate to do some version of reparation for what's happened to primarily a lot of these young ladies in their teenage years. As a result, I don't know if it was as a result of this or not, but after this ruling came down, the American Academy of Plastic Surgeons, one of the National Academies of Plastic Surgeons, has come out against medical transitioning for people under the age of 19. So you wonder now if some of these groups are going to start kind of covering themselves in this process, because so far they've all been either silent or in favor of this process. But now that money in this amount is involved and there's more coming, right? So a little bit of good news, right? So this is good stuff. And this is one of these examples, and this is just a taste of it, guys, how incredibly important it is for Christians especially, but people with their heads on straight, to stick to what is true, to be courageous about what is true, to make sure that we learn how to continue to speak the truth in love, because reality always wins. Reality always wins. And this is just a little taste of that. And maybe it'll turn into a much larger taste of it, but it's important that the church stands up for what is right and good and true in the way that God has built us physically and psychologically. This is the one I want to spend a couple of extra minutes on. So a lot of people have been writing and looking into what's been going on in Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota, and asking questions like, well, why on earth is it Minneapolis and St. Paul? Why is all this stuff just, it explodes a lot of places, but it seems especially bad there. Well, one guy discovered, and I think this is an important perspective for us as we continue to, remind ourselves as Christians that a lot of what we're watching happening is part of an actual spiritual war. So this guy's doing some research, and he discovers that Minneapolis, St. Paul in some circles is nicknamed Paganistan, not because of Pakistan, but because tens of thousands of Wiccans and pagans call the metro area home. Paganicon, and you can go to their website and you can see who's speaking and what's up. Paganicon is a pagan convention held annually in the Twin Cities to further the teachings and practices of paganism. The spiritual forces of darkness have targeted this part of America as much as any other region. So it's just interesting at the very least, friends, to realize, see, these things are real. These kinds of things are significant. We see and we watch spiritual warfare, and sure enough, there really might be a certain kind of version of ground zero in this area because of the influence of paganism that apparently has been there for several years. And if tens of thousands of them openly claim this as home, they have this annual convention. Friends, this is just the gathering of paganism underneath the surface of what's going on in Minneapolis and St. Paul. I'm going to recommend 3 books if you're interested in any of these kinds of things. All 3 of these books I've read, I love. All 3 of them depressed me. So there's that. But if you're interested in following some of this stuff up, Pagan America was written 2 years ago. And this is a little excerpt from Pagan America by John Daniel Davidson. We're not talking about the imminent return of pre-Christian polytheism as the state religion. We're not going back to worshiping Zeus necessarily. But the new paganism will not necessarily come with the outward trappings of the old, but it will be no less pagan for all that. It will be defined, as always, by the belief that nothing is true and everything is permitted. He makes the case in this book that that's the basic belief of the general version of paganism across the world and through time. In that belief produce, as it always has, a world defined almost entirely by power, the strong subjugating and discarding the weak doing what they must to survive. That's why nearly all pagan civilizations, especially the most advanced ones, were slave empires. The more advanced they were, the more brutal and violent they became. The last paragraph there. We should understand all these things are signs of paganism's return, remembering that paganism was not just ritual embodiment of sincere religious belief, but an entire socio-political order. The mystery cults of pagan Rome and Babylon were not just theatrical or fanciful expressions of polytheistic urges on the populace. They were mechanisms of social control. So this notion of paganism, we always think of, the ancient gods that God was frustrated with in the Old Testament. We think of Greece and we think of Rome, and these are openly spiritualistic versions of paganism. But paganism is going to cover this broad swath of anything and everything that is a socio-political religious order that is doing its best to replace Christianity. And it is a full-blown version of replacement, moral, theological, political, socio-political, psychological. It is a full-blown attempt to replace Christianity. And Marxism and Karl Marx, we've talked about cultural Marxism a lot. And thinking about this, I thought, well, I want to spend at least a couple of minutes on this because almost nobody reads about this or knows about this, especially if you know a little bit about Karl Marx. You don't know these kinds of things about Karl Marx. So this book, Paul Kengord's a wonderful author, The Devil and Karl Marx. When I read this a couple of years ago, I devoured this book. So it's not just about Karl Marx, but it's about his ideology through Lenin and Stalin, and then through communism in Western Europe and in America and so forth. But there's a lot in here about his personal life and his personal beliefs that you never read about anywhere else. So when Karl Marx was a teenager, he was trained, he was on his way to becoming a pastor. So he had gotten a certain kind of early, we wouldn't, not necessarily call it a Bible college degree or seminary degree, but he had received a certificate at school because he was on his way into the clergy. But late in his teen years, in his early 20s, something dramatically changed. And as with almost everyone who is a significant public figure who has this kind of influence on the world, somewhere in their younger years, they wrote a lot of poetry. And Karl Marx wrote a lot of poetry as a young man. And he wrote a really, really bizarre play as a young man. And when people go back and they read his early poetry, so this is him rejecting the Christian faith and apparently talking about his personal drive to devote himself to Satan and the destruction of the Christian world. So this is a 20-something. Before the Karl Marx we think of, this is Karl Marx the poet. Historian Paul Johnson, who writes really interesting things about Karl Marx, said this: savagery is a characteristic note of his verse, together with the intense pessimism of the human condition, hatred, a fascination with corruption and violence, suicide pacts, and pacts with the devil. So his early poetry is filled with this stuff. One particular poem called The Player, he writes, I play for the sake of the thundering sea, crashing against the walls of the cliffs, that my eyes be blinded and my heart burst and my soul resound in the depths of hell. You read this stuff and his poetry is full of these kinds of things. So this play that he wrote, Aulanum, I think is how it's pronounced. The reason it is a weird word is that it is an anagram. It's a play on the word Emmanuel. So instead of God with us, Jesus Christ, God with us, you have almost a sort of reversal, the German for Emmanuel and then Aulanum. You almost have a reversal. It's a play on the word Emmanuel. And then the play itself, every character is dark. Every character knows they're dark. Every character thinks they are the hero of the story. There's nothing light in the play at all. Early in the play, the main character, Aulanum, who a lot of people believe is Marx, that's where he's put himself inside of this play. He travels with this young man called Lucindo. Early on, as they travel, they find themselves in a village where there's literally no room in the inn. But Aulanum and the keeper of the inn both see Lucindo as an object of homosexual grooming. So this is the kind of stuff that is inside of Karl Marx before you get to the Communist Manifesto, before you get to these people who laud Marx and act like, well, he's actually kind of the savior of the world and nobody's really done it the right way yet. Well, this is where it gets started. So you guys remember Richard Wurmbrand. He's the guy who wrote the book Tortured for Christ. We read part of his story a couple of Sundays ago. He was the one who was tortured by communists in Romania. He wrote a book that is almost impossible to get a hold of now, called Marx and Satan. And his thesis in that book is that Marx just is a Satanist. And so he digs through a bunch of Marxist stuff. He read a bunch of unreleased documents that were kept inside of Moscow that are just part of their history, and he's writing about all of this. It's a very short book. Again, if you're interested in this, you can find it for free online. It's on PDF file, or you can spend $80 on Amazon to buy a used copy. But it's like 100 pages long. So get it for free. Just read it for free if you like. But he quotes another one of his early poems. Thus heaven I've forfeited, I know it full well. My soul once true to God is chosen for hell. This kind of thing happens over and over and over and over again kind of inside of the stuff that he writes. Marx's family, his personal biography is as filthy as you can possibly conceive it to be. It's as filthy as he was. He never bathed. Did you know that? He never bathed. He didn't change clothes. I mean, it's just, all his life bears the hallmarks of a man who at the very least is demonized, if not actually literally possessed by demons. His family falls apart in horrific ways. Two of his daughters and a son-in-law early on committed suicide. So one of his daughters took poison, killed herself. Another of his daughters was married to another young man who Marx mocked constantly because he was Jewish. Marx hated the Jews. And so the two of them carry out a suicide pact, so the two of them died. They had three of their own children die of malnutrition because Marx never worked a day in his life. Did you know that? Never worked a day in his life. He relied on his father. When his father turned off the money, he relied on his friend Joseph Engels. And when Engels turned off the money, he had no money. So three of his children died of malnutrition. His daughter Laura buried three of her own children before she and her husband also entered into a mutual suicide pact. So this family, right, absolutely hounded by evil forces. Wurmbrand uncovers something that I hadn't seen anybody else mention, and it is a bizarre and rare little reference that Marx makes in some of his stuff. Marx, in some of his writings, talks about our friend Robin Goodfellow, or I've been trained by our good friend Robin Goodfellow. Our Robin Goodfellow is at work in the world. Well, that's a really strange reference, except William Tyndale, who was one of the great preachers and reformers in the English language. Marx died in London. William Tyndale, in his sermons, used to refer to Satan as Robin Goodfellow. So Wurmbrand is saying this is just part of Marx's poetic bent. He's talking about, I've given my life over to Robin Goodfellow. These communist revolutions we're watching kind of foaming under the surface. This is Satan at work, right? Inside of this book, Richard Wurmbrand literally says, communism is collective demon possession. So the next time you have a friend who says, I'm a Christian and a Marxist, just, have these things in the backs of your minds, right? So this continues to have its influence. It continues to do its job. We probably see some spiritual version of this showing up around the U.S., hitting the surface. The threat of paganism, broadly conceived and even specifically in terms of satanic influence. Friends, this really is real. When and where Christianity is in decline, some form of paganism is going to take its place. Our natural state as human beings in civilization is paganism. The one force that changed that in human history are biblical civilizations. Jewish and Christian civilizations stopped that. Other than that, and again, this is strange for us because we've all been sort of brewing and stewing inside of Christian and biblical civilization. But you take that away and you just have one version of paganism or another. You have moral and religious relativism. And isn't it interesting that all religions are great and equal except for Christianity and Judaism? Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? A lot of earth worship. General spirituality, again, anything and everything can and should be pursued and is wonderful and great except for anything that comes out of the Bible. Well, isn't that interesting? Who could possibly be behind that idea? Statism, child sacrifice. Child sacrifice has always been a part of paganism, and it is the biblical religions, the biblical faith that has always pushed back on child sacrifice. Always. We are still under the specter of child sacrifice inside of the Western world. Well over 1 million kids aborted every year in the United States of America. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. Do you remember? Less than 1% of them for medically necessary reasons. Right? So this is just bloodshed for pagan gods. It doesn't matter what name it's under. Doesn't matter at all what name it's under. So paganism wants to replace Christianity. It wants to tear down the inheritance that is received in the civilization, and it's an inheritance, a foundation it cannot rebuild. And for some reason, people in the church are always willing to help. And we've seen some of that from week to week. But thinking about this reminded me of a passage inside of the book of Ezekiel, where God shows Ezekiel, who is in exile essentially, what is happening inside the temple and the reasons why God is going to complete this exile and judge his people. Ezekiel chapter 8. I'm going to read verses 7 through 18. This is a vision that Ezekiel has. God is showing him the temple, and this is what he sees. And he brought me to the entrance of the court, and when I looked, behold, there was a hole in the wall. God is always doing strange things with his prophet. He doesn't walk through the door. Who would do that, right? But in a vision, God takes you through a hole in the wall. There was a hole in the wall. Then he said to me, Son of man, dig in the wall. So I dug in the wall, and behold, there was an entrance. And he said to me, Go in and see the vile abominations that they are committing here inside the temple. So I went in and saw, and there engraved on the wall all around was every form of creeping things and loathsome beasts and all the idols of the house of Israel. And before them stood 70 men of the elders of the house of Israel, with Jehoiada the son of Shaphan standing among them. Each had his censer in his hand, and the smoke of the cloud of the incense went up. And he said to me, Son of man, have you seen what the elders of the house of Israel are doing in the dark, each in his room of pictures? For they say, the Lord does not see us. The Lord has forsaken the land. He also said to me, you will see greater abominations that they commit. Then he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the house of the Lord, and behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz, an ancient Mesopotamian fertility god or goddess, depending on who worshipped Tammuz. Then he said to me, have you seen this, O son of man? You will see greater abominations than these. Then he brought me into the inner court of the house of the Lord, and behold, at the entrance of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, there were about 25 men with their backs to the temple of the Lord and their faces toward the east, worshiping the sun toward the east. Then he said to me, have you seen this, O son of man? Is it too light a thing for the house of Judah to commit the abominations that they commit here, that they should fill the land with violence and provoke me still further to anger? We get caught up inside of they're worshiping these false gods and who's Tammuz and the writings on the wall, and you've got elders and priests and young men bowing toward the sun. But did you notice, because God's going to say it again in chapter 9, people who are worshiping pagan gods have filled the land with violence. Worshiping pagan gods is not a one-for-one replacement of the worship of the God of the Bible. It is a completely different socio-political order. God says, because they've done this, the land is broken out in violence. Behold, they put the branch to their nose, or they've brought judgment upon themselves. They'll be dragged out of here. Therefore, I will act in wrath. My eye will not spare, nor will I have pity. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, I will not hear them. There's a handful of times in the Old Testament when God says that. He tells his prophet, I've gotten to the point where it just doesn't matter anymore how much they reach out to me. We've hit a point of judgment, and here it comes. So in chapter 9, verses 6 through 9, God is preparing judgment, and he's talking about how it's going to happen, and it's just not pretty. Ezekiel chapter 9, verse 6. Kill old men outright, young men and maidens, little children and women. And God at this point has delineated those who are still devoted to him and those who are not. So this is how judgment is falling. Little children and women, but touch no one on whom is the mark, those still devoted to him. And begin in my sanctuary. The people who should have been defending the word of God and the way of God haven't. This is where we're starting. So they began with the elders who were before the house. Then he said to them, defile the house and fill the courts with the slain. Go out. So they went out and struck the city. And while they were striking, I was left alone and fell upon my face and cried, Ah, Lord God, will you destroy all the remnant of Israel in the outpouring of your wrath on Jerusalem? Then he said to me, the guilt of the house of Israel and Judah is exceedingly great. The land is full of blood and the city full of injustice, because they have forsaken the Lord. For they say, the Lord has forsaken the land, and the Lord does not see. That's not a throwaway line. That's what happens to culture, God says, when it lets go of the biblical foundation. That is what the growth of the kingdom of God exorcises in a culture when it begins to plant roots. There's a way of looking at the expansion of Christianity as a kind of territorial or national exorcism, because the kingdom of God is showing up and it's actually getting rid of these things that shed blood, injustice, kill babies, boom, 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 boom. And Christianity brings something different, entirely different. And God is clear with Ezekiel. We're getting rid of it. They've done injustice in my land because of the pagan gods that they are worshiping.